Welcome everybody to Working with Sovereign Citizens. We just had a question of how do you do that? Well, that's why they're here. Just a couple housekeeping things before you leave today. If you haven't already, just give me your Supreme Court number up here next to your name, and I will get you some CLE credit for this session. The handouts are in the back. I think everybody got one. We do have a new slate of programs that was just published in our last newsletter. If you haven't seen that already, stop at the circulation desk and share that with you. Our program next month is the brand new self-help portal that the Legal Aid Society of Columbus has. It should be going live.
It's somewhat live right now.
I think it's somewhat live for us. It'll be live for everybody else by the time she speaks next month. So there's just a few spots left for that one too. I'm going to turn it over to Erin and Michelle from the Supreme Court to educate you all.
Fantastic. So, thank you guys so much for coming. I am Erin Waltz. I'm the Library Public Services Manager at the Supreme Court of Ohio Law Library just down the street. I see some faces I recognize, so hi. And this is Michelle Graff, our research librarian at the court. Normally we do this presentation with one additional librarian from OSU, but he's fallen ill, so we're going to kind of punt through his part of the presentation. We've been working on this for a while though, so I promise it'll be good. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time, but we'll also take questions at the end. So we're going to talk a little bit about working with sovereign citizens, and we're going to talk a little bit about what sovereign citizens are at the end, but also people that come in to your office, your practice, if you're the clerk, that maybe look like sovereign citizens on their face, but can be other things. So we're really going to address people that are walking into your offices with low legal information. We're going to talk about people who have misinformation, and then we're going to talk about sovereign citizens kind of as their thing. So as we discuss that, what are we figuring out? We're figuring out how we handle legal requests based on misinformation or purported legal doctrines, how we can serve the requester, and how we maintain appropriate resources for not only helping the requester, but helping everyone else that comes in at the same time. So we're going to discuss all that kind of material. We're also going to discuss that people can be more than one thing. In a Venn diagram, sovereign citizens also have low information and misinformation. So we're going to kind of talk about that in general, and then how that specifically might relate or what that might look like coming in the door for you. So one of our slides talks about the AALL ethical principles. We are librarians. This is our overriding mission statement that comes out of the American Association of Law Libraries. It talks about how we provide legal access and related information, how we establish our policies. And while this isn't necessarily the exact policy we use at the Supreme Court anybody has, if you don't have a policy in place, either this policy or a policy set out by an association that you work with is a good place to start crafting a policy. What does good customer service look like to you? What does help look like? Where do you draw the line? How do you set a policy? And we'll talk a little bit about, do you need a policy, or are you going to rely on your staff's best judgment and what that kind of looks like. In the Supreme Court, we rely on our staff's best judgment with some kind of overriding principles. But if you're in the process of either crafting a policy or you don't have one, and like us, you've noticed an uptick of low information or sovereign citizens walking in your door, now is probably the time to think about making one. So that's kind of, our disclaimer for this. This is a really good statement. We do use it quite a bit. So I'm going to first talk about inexperienced requesters. So people with low legal information walking in the door. People with no experience with the law or court system. The National Conference on State Courts found in 2015 that only 26% of defendants are represented by counsel in a civil lawsuit. 26% was a shockingly low number to me. I felt like it was going to be more than that. So you have a lot of people walking in the door for whatever reason, no matter what you do, that aren't represented by counsel, that are kind of winging it. You also have, according to the Department of Education, 16% of adults walking in the door that are digitally illiterate. It's great if you have forms and help online, but if they can't use a computer, if they don't have access to a computer, those forms and all that help are really of no use to them. So that's something that we struggle with. Possibly the last thing on this list, low literacy or illiteracy. 32 million adults in the United States can't read. So it doesn't matter what I sit in front of them. An index, a form, an online form, if they can't read it, how are we going to help them? So kind of to know that those are the statistics of things walking in the door for you, which were somewhat startling to me as well, where I went, oh, well, that kind of explains a lot of things I see on a regular basis. So how is that gonna work? What are you gonna do? Where are you gonna start? I am sure everyone in here has had the fun and exciting experience of explaining the basics of court structure. I'm the Supreme Court, and while that sounds really great, it doesn't mean I can supremely solve all your problems or questions, like some things are a municipal court, some things are common pleas court, and I'm certainly not the federal court down the street. So we get that a lot. Well, I failed here, I want to take my case to federal court. Well, that's exciting. Let's explain the difference between that. We do a lot of federal versus state. We do a lot of Schoolhouse Rock's kind of explaining. These are the three branches of government, like your three-ring circus. And it's very difficult when you've been doing this for a number of years to think about the basics. I know how the court system works. I know exactly how it works. So, I'm sitting down the street, this is what we do, this is what all of you do. So it's very difficult to step back and think about how it, but we kind of went back. I wish I could put Schoolhouse Rocks on my website. Like there are a couple of them that I'm like, that's how a bill becomes law. That guy's a keeper too. So we explain a lot of that. We also go back to explaining a lot of natural language searching, easily using things, indexes, LibGuides from other libraries, kind of the basics where it's hard to kind of take a step back and do that, but doing that. And at the same time, avoiding the unauthorized practice of law. So there's your fun. In fact, the unauthorized practice of law has an office established in the Supreme Court. They work a few floors beneath us. I don't ever want to see them, for the reason that they're really there. I'm like, we help them do research. I don't ever want them to come up and be like, so, here's the thing. So we're real careful about that, as is probably everyone in this room, but it is something, you have a lot of people walking in the door that are pushing you into that gray area, up to the line. We'll talk a little bit about that. The difference between legal advice versus legal information, what you can do, provide legal information, start people with their research, explain how to find and use legal resources, provide sample forms, explain how to use the index in the clerk system, how to keyword search names. You can't provide them legal advice. You can't interpret legal information. You can't tell them how to fill out a form. I'm gonna guess that's a question you all get a lot. It's a question we get a lot. I love forms that come with instructions. Best thing ever. So we kind of do that. We also, and I suspect all of you have a very hard time with this too, people that ask you a question and you tell them, I can't answer that, that's legal advice, I'm not an attorney, or I'm not your attorney, just sitting in court and somebody comes up because you look like you know what you're talking about and you're not their attorney, and you say, well, I can't tell you. And then they rephrase the question, as though rephrasing the question somehow makes it a different question that you can answer. And so that is a real struggle, especially with people with low information that are walking in the door. They don't understand that this is legal information. They don't understand that there's a reason attorneys are out there and exist to interpret these kind of things for you. So it can be very difficult. If you're like us, it's very hard to say no. It's very disappointing. We're librarians. We want to give you the answers. But we do find a lot of times we have a hard time. We have one patron in particular who come in and she will rephrase the question like 6 times and the answer is still, I can't tell you that, that's legal advice. Well, how about, but I can't tell you that because that's legal advice. Well, how about, and you're probably like, why don't you just look at this book and I'll come back in like 15 minutes. It'll be fine for everybody. So when you start at the very beginning, it's a very hard place to start. How many of you have been doing your job or something similar for more than 2 years? Yeah. So you know how it works. You know the vocabulary, you know the language, you know how the system works, you know all the processes. How hard is it to go back and explain to someone who doesn't know the legal terms, the language, or something like that, what that means or how to start, right? It's really difficult. You're so ingrained. I can tell you, you know, the difference between a defendant and a plaintiff. I can tell you a lot of things. But it's very hard to step back and be like, here's the very beginning of this. And how do you explain that to someone? You know, I have a 7-year-old at home. The explanation for why the sky is blue and why grass is green and why like a lot of these things happen aren't things that I necessarily think about all the time. It's just because. So it's kind of the same thing. You're having a lot of people come in to remember how to go back, that this is a different language to most people. Law is a completely foreign language. You're using a lot of Latin terms. You're using a lot of terms that we just don't see in everyday usage. So there is that. And it's very hard to simplify that down, to say step by step without crossing over into legal advice. Here's kind of what you need to do. We have a disclaimer that comes on our email to non-attorney patrons that says something like, we hope this will help you get started with your research. You know, if you need someone to do a research interpret the law for you, you should consider talking to an attorney. So that's kind of the, you know, the disclaimer language. I'm sure some of you use it in your day-to-day exercises that, you know, I'm not an attorney. I can't tell you how to do this, you know. There's a legal clinic here. There's, you know, you can seek attorneys here. You can call the Bar Association for a lawyer referral, those kind of things. But we use a lot of this disclaimer language in dealing with the public, kind of as a cover for us, but also to kind of reiterate that legal research often sounds simple. It sounds like this is a problem you should be able to solve. It's a very DIY culture. Like, people will try to put in their own windows and build their own houses. That's the world we're living in. And that's great until you get in court and you can lose, you know, tens of thousands of dollars, or your kids can be taken away. Like, there's a lot of ramifications that people aren't necessarily thinking of that really do require an attorney. So those are just some of the things to look out for people with low legal information, to kind of step back. Michelle's going to talk a little bit about misinformation, and then I'm going to come back and talk about sovereign citizens.
All right. So misinformation. You know, sometimes it's not that your requester has low information, it's that they are just misinformed. I think the example on the slide says, you know, someone calls in and says, there should be a statue about dogs running around through my back lawn. How do I find it? We get questions like this all the time. What's the law on this? There should be a law on that. And a lot of times, they're not wrong. There are rules about something like that. It's just not in the place where they think it is. Like in the case with the dog, there's not a statute that says that, but there is, you know, a local municipal ordinance that talks about unsupervised, unleashed domestic animals. You know, so a lot of times, you know, it's not that the information doesn't exist, it's just in a different place than what they think. But then, on the other hand, there are requesters who are just fundamentally misinformed about things. You know, they've been told the wrong thing by somebody else, they've seen something online or read an article somewhere that maybe they didn't fully understand and they've drawn their own conclusions. You know, they're confused about thinking that one area of the law applies to this other area, especially like when it comes to like federal and state stuff. I get people who are kind of confused how that can be different sometimes. And then this is a good example. So this is a poll from a YouTube video. I don't know how many people here around YouTube very often, but a lot of times people will like post like chunks from movies or songs that they've kind of reworked in their own way, and they put this copyright disclaimer underneath it. And they think, I put this copyright disclaimer, like I'm not claiming this as my own, like, you know, YouTube can't take this down. I'm not violating copyright. I've put a disclaimer on it. Because they've seen other people do that. There's all sorts of blogs out there about like, oh yeah, you just have to put this thing, and it all of a sudden makes it legal and right. We all know that copyright law is vastly more complex than that. And that this disclaimer doesn't necessarily allow you to leave something up, especially when you've taken, you know, I think this one's like 6 minutes of Avengers Infinity War, you know, an entire song by Carl Sandburg. And I have a link on there too to YouTube's policy, and that's kind of the way I like to deal with misinformed people, is you kind of want to go and take them back to, here is the authority for this. Like if you read YouTube's policies, they have a whole page about fair use and how this disclaimer doesn't necessarily work and doesn't necessarily mean that they won't take down your content, because putting a disclaimer up, doesn't necessarily protect you from copyright violation. But these people are misinformed because they've seen it done elsewhere. They've heard from other people that it works, and so sometimes they come in and, they're wrong, and it's not, it's an innocent, kind of wrongness. And they read it, they thought that they were right, and you just have to direct them to something like, YouTube's policies to show them why that information is not correct. And then this one was I don't know how into Facebook everybody is, but back in 2012, there was like this big to-do, and people were pasting this thing. It was like a hoax where you had to claiming copyright of the information that you put out on Facebook. It pops up every once in a while. My mom copy and pasted it the other day, and I had to call and be like, Mom, that's not like a real thing. But it's another example of how misinformation can spread, especially like if you don't understand legal information. If you have low information, sometimes you can fall for these sort of like misinformation things or spread more misinformation. And then I have this question. This is a real question that I got one day. I had someone call me and say, hey, I saw this video online. They were talking about this bank account that the Federal Reserve set up for me at birth, and I use my social security number to access it, and I just have to send it to him. How do I find out if there's money in this account? How do I access it? He had seen this video on YouTube, and he had heard this person spout a bunch of what sounded to him like laws and a lot of legalese, a lot of information that sounded true. He talked about the Social Security Act of 1935. And this person hadn't read the Social Security Act of 1935, but he had seen someone on a video who said that this was true. It wasn't true. And it turns out that the Federal Reserve actually had a whole page about this hoax that was going through. So again, I just sent him, hey, here's the Federal Reserve saying this. Here is the authority, kind of telling you what's actually up with it. But the biggest thing with misinformation, and the reason people hold on to it so much, is because nobody likes to be wrong. Who here likes to be wrong? I didn't think so. So it's uncomfortable to learn that you're wrong. People will resist sometimes if you tell them information that doesn't go along with something that they already believe to be true. And a lot of sovereign citizens kind of fall into that category. They have this beliefs and they think they're right, and they don't want to hear that they're wrong, or they don't want to see evidence that they're wrong. So when you're having to correct somebody who's been misinformed, you have to work against this cognitive bias that people have already kind of built up, because people, they want to be right, and they tend to only focus on the information that supports what they already think, and they automatically want to dismiss the information that says the opposite. And that can be very challenging to work up against. And some of the ways to deal with that is try to recognize this bias. You can sometimes tell when people have a biased view of information when you start to talk to them. And if you can recognize it, sometimes you can overcome it. Explain indicators of authority and accuracy. I kind of showed you how I did that with pulling information from the Social Security website, pulling information from YouTube's policies and procedures. Sometimes if you can explain, here's the all authority for it, here's this accurate information, they can help them reevaluate their beliefs. And remember that we can only offer information, you can only give them so much. You can't persuade them to believe what you're saying. And sometimes, you may walk away, or somebody may walk away and they think that, you were wrong, even though you know that the information you gave them was correct. And you have to remember it's not a reflection upon yourself. Some people are just not going to believe it even if you said it right out there in front of them. And then you have to be aware of your own biases too. sometimes every once in a while someone will like put in a question and I'm like, that can't be true. Like that can't be a thing. And then lo and behold, like it is something that's true. It is something that's a thing. It's just something that I myself maybe didn't know enough about to recognize that they had a valid question in the first place. So never, don't dismiss people maybe just because, you think, oh no, like that's not true. That can't be. You have to work against your own bias as well. And then this last thing, I just really liked this bizarre question pyramid. It came from a library conference, but I think it's something that we can all relate to, especially if you're dealing with the public or answering questions on a regular basis from people. It kind of starts at the bottom with what Erin and I have already talked about, sane people who might be misguided or uninformed. And then it kind of slowly goes from there, sane but angry, sane but stubborn, unusual beliefs, and then people who just aren't there, like maybe the person who calls and wanted to talk about how the government was spying on him, and it escalates.
And you do it Friday afternoon.
Yeah, no, they always call on Friday afternoons. It's always, or unusual beliefs. Like we had somebody who faxed in a question, which is already kind of a red flag because I don't know about you guys, but we don't get a lot of faxes anymore. So when someone faxes in a question, I'm already like, oh my goodness, like what is this? And it was somebody who just kind of disagreed about divorce being a thing and wanted to like have these marriage camps. She wanted to change the law on divorce essentially. And while the question was a page long and she was kind of wrong about some of the things she was saying, from that I read through it all and I was like, okay, she wants to change a law. So I can send her information about how as a citizen you can petition to change a law. I can't deal with the rest of it, but even within this question that was just kind of full of confused information, uninformed, misguided, we were still able to take something out of it and help her with something. But yeah, and so moving on to sovereign citizens, which can really be anywhere along that pyramid, if not everything on the pyramid at the same time.
So how many of you here have had experience with sovereign citizens? Yeah. So we kind of gave you a general overview, the best definition, the best concise definition we can find of what sovereign citizens are. The catch-all phrase, the anti-government individuals and groups that share some common beliefs. One way or another, this is my favorite part, one way or another though, all sovereign citizens, whether tied to an organization or not, adhere to a view that the existing American governmental structure, including courts and law enforcement, is illegitimate, and that they, the sovereign citizen, retains an individual common law identity, exempting them from the authority of those fraudulent government institutions. Which is fantastic. They're sure using a lot of government resources for people who don't believe in it. We're just kind of like, but I am the government, and you're calling me to ask these questions for something you don't believe in. And that's right there, like the cognitive dissonance of sovereign citizens. They're involved in the court system. They're going to the clerks. But they don't believe in the court system. They don't believe you have any authority over them. They don't believe that the auditor down here can collect taxes on their property or taxes on them. They don't believe that their taxes should be supporting the institutions they're supporting, but they have zero problem calling those institutions for help. All the time. So we're going to kind of address some key phrases I'm going to throw out to you guys and let you throw me some key phrases you see a lot, because this is kind of a crowdsourcing thing. They pop up. We'll talk about some really common phrases, and then we'll notice, and I'm sure you do, the ebbs and flows. I'll see something kind of spike up. Why? I don't know. New YouTube video. Say, and then kind of calm back down, and then I'll see something else. So it's always interesting to see what's coming in the door for you guys, what's coming in the door for us that we're kind of looking at. And then we'll go back a little bit and talk a little bit more at the very end about cognitive biases and about some of the things that we get that we're like, oh, you're a sovereign citizen, and then it literally does turn out to be a completely legit, normal question that I'm just like, I didn't know that's a thing. So they're talking about basically fraudulent government. So The next slide you have is about Barefoot's World. If you aren't familiar with Charles Barefoot, he is, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the leader of a KKK organization, not particularly a stellar individual, a domestic terrorist. But this is a website run in his name by someone who has passed away. But it's a real interesting deep dive into sovereign citizenry. Like, if you have not looked at it, we thought about playing it. It plays MIDI music the whole time. Like, there's a whole like soundtrack to this website. So we are not clicking on it, even though like it's somewhat horrifying and enjoyable. And there's a lot of things going on with it that you're just like, oh, that's a thing. But it kind of talks about, and I know these slides are kind of small, so we'll have Angela, we'll see if she can send you out like the full presentation so you can read some of these slides, because I realize you guys are working off the same like note kind of slides that we have. But if you can't read this, it talks about who's running America. Have you ever asked that question? I personally have never asked that question. Like, I'm pretty sure I know. But sovereign citizens under the doctrine of, the government as a parent, as a result that, the United States has gone through bankruptcy in the 1930s, and all the assets of the American people, their persons, and the country itself are held by the Depository Trust Corporation, and it has an address, and secured by UCC commercial liens. I love the UCC. I feel like the UCC is getting a lot of bad press lately, just really bad. I'm like, the UCC never thought this was coming. And then they've monetized them as debt money by the Federal Reserve. And that sovereign citizens have their law, which is a private law, and the law is written by the National Law Institute and law professors in the Bar Association, so all our laws. Foreign corporations, foreign banking interests, it's always, the Getty, the foreign banking interests, the Colonel. And they've come to this petition, writing law fraudulently, deleting the titles and nobilities of honor. If you've never heard of this was a particularly interesting one. Back in about 1810, the government proposed what would have been the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, and it had to do with titles and nobility of honor. This is the strangest thing. And basically, it was an amendment that would have said that if you were given a title that you accepted from a foreign government, so like princess, prince, the honorable, whatever, that you would renounce your United States citizenship. How this all kind of plays into sovereign citizens is like a real long game. So what's interesting about the proposed 13th Amendment is it was ratified, it was like 2 states short, and then more states started joining the Union. So it got further and further and further behind. So at this point, it actually is still sitting out there, like a lot of kind of interesting amendments to the Constitution. A lot of things are still sitting out there. There was no expiration date. We're never going to pass this. And now they're like 26 states short. But oddly, the proposed 13th Amendment got published in a lot of books concurrent at the time, without the disclaimer that said, this has not been ratified by the number of states to make it. But the Code of Virginia, for a number of years, for longer than it should have, but longer than it should have for someone to catch this error, reprinted it as part of the United States Constitution. A lot of constitutional treatises at the time, and if you ever have experience with sovereign citizens, going back to these really old books that we'll talk about later, this is one of the reasons why that the 13th Amendment to the Constitution isn't the 13th Amendment that you and I are familiar with. It's a post-Civil War amendment. But this nobility and honors thing, and that this nobility and honors thing would have created an oligarchy of lawyers and bankers, and they control all 3 branches of government. And then our law comes from the Hague Convention in the UN, which isn't true. And almost all UN treaties have been codified into the United States codes. So it kind of is this thing, and they're deriving off this amendment that is a legitimate proposal. Again, that's kind of the trick with sovereign citizens, right? Everything they say sounds kind of like it could be true. Like there's some kind of legal phrase that we'll talk about, some kind of catch-all in it that makes the YouTube video sound a little like, well, this could be like a thing. So the United States, so the 13th Amendment and the way it long game comes into play into sovereign citizens is that as attorneys, and I'm sure most of you are in here for CLE credit, you guys are attorneys, that the phrase Esquire at the end of your name is a title of honor, and thus you have renounced all U.S. citizenship, because this is really an amendment that was fraudulently deleted from the Constitution. So you're not United States citizens. You cannot write laws that would disqualify at times like entire portions of the General Assembly in the United States Congress. That you can't make laws because you've renounced your United States citizenship, and you have no authority over them. Also, why they're not calling you to represent them in court. Not that they're going to pay you anyways. So that's kind of the thing. It's this really long game. So you'll see a lot of 13th Amendment. They're called 13thers. That you'll see that kind of come up. And it's really confusing because the 13th Amendment you and I are familiar with has nothing to do with this. And you're like, wait, what? But it got reprinted. So that's, again, one of those things you see as it goes back into long, older law books. So, the belief system in brief. The U.S. government has been replaced or overthrown. It's gone bankrupt. At birth, the fake government creates a corporate shell identity for every baby born in the United States. So your birth certificate is your fake corporate shell. And you can separate yourself from your corporate shell identity, also known as redemption, and you become a sovereign citizen. So, there's not really a lot I can say about this except for the next slide. That's not how it works. That is not how any of this works. And it's really, you and I are all thinking this, and it's really trying, right? I mean, you can't just sit there and be like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. But that's the kind of cognitive dissonance of sitting on the side and knowing that you're dealing with somebody that is woefully misinformed about how the system works. So a little bit about the communications breakdown. So that's exactly where we are right now, right? They're saying something, they're saying you as attorneys have renounced your United States citizenship. We're like, this is not how any of this works. And they're spouting off things about the Social Security Act of 1935, which again sounds kind of like it could be legitimate. They're citing like arguments in the United States Commercial Code, and you're like, but this isn't a commercial code thing. But it's there's a real cognitive dissonance. So the constitutional philosophy sounds like the language of common law, but the meaning and basic assumptions are just not remotely true. And that's really, a problem that you and I have, that they're coming in. Again, it sounds like the reverse of this is we recently got a question about homesteading. I was like, oh, homesteading, but you're a sovereign citizen. Like, this does not seem like it's going to be a thing. Turns out it's 100% a thing. Like, we're just, we're out there. The auditor, like, this man was elderly. His taxes had went up. He wanted to keep his home, like, which is all 100% like something that he should be able to do. And there's tax break, but you kind of get to the point where every phone call, every person that walks in the door that you're like, that's a little iffy. Are you a sovereign citizen? And then you're like, oh no, I'm misinformed, or I have, like, I'm skeptical of everything now, right? Like, everything that walks in your door, you're like, wait. So the communications breakdown. What to expect when you're expecting a sovereign citizen. So I'm going to throw out, these are a few words, if you can't read them because they're very small, keywords we see: straw man, redemption, referring to the state or the country as a corporation or incorporated. The question, where is your oath of office? We get this question a huge amount now, like wanting to see judges and clerk and like people's oath of offices. We have to figure out where those were stored. Like it's a thing that a lot of people sign for a lot of things, and like figuring out where they were stored, it's a real thing, but that's not really what they're asking. Special trust deposit in Admiralty. Admiralty law is really big. I was asked a few months ago that by law, again, it never really quite makes sense. By law, there has to be one county or parish in each state that operates under Admiralty law. In which county is that in Ohio? And I thought, well, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a thing. Also, we don't have a huge amount of water. I mean, Lake Erie's nice, but it doesn't seem like probably Lake County, Ohio, or Ashtabula is operating under Admiralty law. So Turns out that's a sovereign citizen thing. I mean, it was kind of suspect on the top of the question, but it does seem like, I don't know, like maybe we do use admiralty laws. So, the signature with UCC 1-207, you see things without prejudice. How many of you have done? I am a secured party, or they've copyrighted their name, but it's not their full name. It's just their first name and their middle name, right? Because they don't want to use their last name because that's part of their corporate shell. Or that you see like natural person after their signature. They're not, you know. Do you guys have you seen anything else that you're like, oh wow, this is a phrase I see all the time?
Affidavit of truth.
Oh, yeah.
I am man.
I am man, yeah, all in caps normally, like, yeah, so, anybody else, yeah. Those are definitely red flags. When I see those coming in, we're like, okay, well, you know. People also like to call and ask us questions, and they don't want to tell us who they are, and we don't necessarily, like, ask, we don't
Because you're
care.
recording them.
Yeah, probably. You know, that's the fine line, right, to the top of the pyramid, like the tinfoil hat kind of concerns that some of these people have. And again, it's all just where you are, you know, on the pyramid. But yeah, I'm probably recording everything. I'm totally illegitimate, but they'll call and ask me questions anyway, so it'll be fine. So, let's talk about the next one. What does a sovereign citizen research? So if any of you are dealing with research or you're seeing briefs, filings, records coming into your office, coming through your office, you see these things, you're seeing, I'm guessing, a lot of things to Blackstone's commentaries. Way to figure out where those were. Bouvier's Law Dictionary, that really like predates Black's. First, Erie Railroad versus Tompkins. Our favorite, the Uniform Commercial Code. Liens, Admiralty Law. I could probably go on forever about this. The website at the very bottom, if you look at that, it's constitutionalgov.us, and this is a sovereign citizen website. They have somehow managed to get copies of all these old books, probably from Hyde. They have them all linked off the website, so you know, for easy access. Again, this is another one of those you could get lost for hours just in it. There's going to be 12 states. They run a conference call almost every month for, 2 to 4 hours. You can just call and join in. And it's intense. Like, they've got the map, they've got like the 12 states organized, they've got all this documentation on how you purportedly do this, how you become a sovereign citizen, how you do research, how you file papers in court, how to cancel your birth certificate, how to no longer be a United States citizen. Like, we get that question a lot, and we're like, you can't really. I mean, I guess you could go up to Canada and hand them the passport and walk across the border, like. But it's really, so these are kind of things you will see a lot of if you're seeing filings. And like I said, if you ever want to deep dive, this website is a super interesting site to kind of look at all the things. And she's got kind of like a small file dictionary. They're also just randomly emailing like us and other libraries to get definitions out of Black's Law Dictionary, and then they're just republishing them like as a dictionary on their website, kind of like you would a legal thesaurus. I've never seen anything quite like this, but like anytime they come across a word, us, University of Dayton, University of Cincinnati, like we have talked to colleagues around the state and in other states, and they're quite familiar with this website, and you just kind of see, it's kind of fun to like watch and be like, oh, we've got to ask for the definition. How long is it going to be before it appears on this website? So there is that to kind of be aware of. My admiralty law has never seen so much use. Again, we live in Ohio. It's not, a huge admiralty law state. Maybe if you're in Ashtabula, but again, click there. Helping the sovereign citizen or not. So we kind of have a loose policy of what we're going to do. We help find the resources, but then it becomes a question, when do you draw the line at overburdensome requests? And that's the thing, you only have so much staff time. You only have so much time, you have hours to bill, you have things to get done. These are not things that are necessarily easy to draw the line at because it's a slippery slope, right? You help find one answer and then they email you or request something again, and then every day, sometimes twice a day. So it becomes a real slippery slope because all of you, or many of you, are working in public agencies. You can't say no. You can't deliberately, your directors, your bosses, elected officials you may or may not work for aren't going to tolerate you being, these people are voters too. Well, some of them are voters. But that's not a thing you can do. And that's not a thing that we went into service to do. None of you became an attorney or clerk or anything else to deliberately like shut people down or be mean. We didn't become librarians. We became librarians because we want to help you. We want to give you information. We want to provide that for you. So that's a real question of how you help to find the resources. Where do you, go ahead and draw the line? Helping with an involved problem. This is kind of going back to that cognitive bias. Do not waste your time arguing about their legal theories. It is an argument you will lose. It is an argument that you will not feel good about in the end. No one is happy at the end of this. Do not attempt to direct them to what they really want, what you think they really want, because again, people are not necessarily happy with that. Now, you're going to get some low information and misinformed people that maybe eventually reading through whatever you're giving them, they're going to get to where they need to be. But again, that's that gray area into the unauthorized practice of law, to tell them to replace their words with other words. Do try to focus the discussion on what you can do to help them. Loads of people we work with, be they sovereign citizens, low informed, misinformed, or just general public walking in the door, are happy with any information they come out with. Most of our sovereign citizens are super thrilled with their admiralty law or their definitions or their cases, and that's great. Like, if it's helping them, that's what I'm in the business of doing. Also, I work for 7 justices down the street who I am serving the citizens of Ohio, and so is my staff, and we are not treating anyone like they are a second-class citizen. So there is that. So we do try to focus on what we can do to help them, just like Michelle's one-page fax. We can help you contact your state representative. We can tell you how you start the process of changing a law. We can also have a huge discussion about how you used a contronym and what that is now. So that was a fun thing that happened about the word cleave, which means two separate but distinctly opposite things. We did not know that. This is the time to think about whether your office needs policies on these requesters or whether you expect your staff members to employ their own professional judgment. My librarians and my staff employ their own professional judgment. But we do have policies and procedures in place. If someone gets out of hand, if something gets out of line, if it gets too intense, that is the time they go to the front desk and say, I need Aaron, or I need one of the other somebody comes down. And it's a very, you don't want to say good cop, bad cop kind of a thing, but you can be nice to a point, and then we get to the point where, what is it exactly I can do to help you? What is your question? Let us help answer that, and let's move on with our day. So there's only so much time and energy we can devote to this, to a person, so we're very cognizant of, if it's been 15, 20 minutes, it doesn't look like it's going anywhere, I'll get a call from my front desk staff that says, you probably need to come down and kind of stand to the side and look at that. So having that kind of policy in place, especially if you work in either a library or some place that you're dealing with citizens coming in. So the clerk's office is a good example. You're almost never alone at that front desk. That's a safety precaution anyway, but to step in and have a discussion amongst your staff, knowing that someone is going to step in and say, hey, why don't I help you now? Because sometimes it's just very frustrating, and it helps to have that second person come in. So having discussed that policy, having those kind of things in place can save you a lot down the line. So that is something to consider, what you are going to do and how you are going to handle it. What to say? So we often reinforce, we're librarians, we're super nice, that we are very sympathetic. We will listen for about 15 to 20 minutes. And if it's not going anywhere, somebody else will step in. We repeat their key terms back to them. That is something that if you have ever taken positive interaction classes with people, repeating terms back to someone makes them feel like they're being heard, like they're being validated, like their arguments are good arguments. Again, this isn't a question about whether you or I agree with their arguments, whether you or I are addressing that. That's not something I'm going to do. I'm not correcting their choice of terms. I'm hearing what they are saying. I am repeating that back to them, and I am trying to help them on their way. We often end our requests kind of with that same disclaimer that we put down in the email. We're not attorneys, or we're not your attorneys. We can't necessarily advise you on this. Legal research is very difficult. And that kind of a step by step. So we've gone over this. The listen, repeat their key terms back to them. The interview. So a lot of times we found this very helpful for us. It sometimes helps when they're trying to find a form or something in the court rules. What does your ideal document look like? What does this look like to you? Because if it looks like something that doesn't exist or isn't a thing that we could produce, you kind of know you're at the end there. Well, this looks like me canceling my birth certificate. It's probably a question for vital statistics then. I mean, we have no problem sending them elsewhere that maybe can help them. I don't think vital statistics can help them cancel their birth certificate either, but that's where their birth certificate is. And sometimes referring them, even though you know that when I send them to vital statistics, when I send them to their state representative to change the law, there may not be anything they can do for them, but they are certainly in a position to speak with authority about birth certificates. When I send someone to the clerk of courts because they have a question about filing a document with that clerk, it may not be a document they're able to file, but the clerk at least has the authority to say, these are our policies and procedures. So don't ever feel bad, even if you think the person you're referring to them cannot help them, to say, these are the experts in this field. That's a thing you can do. Who knows? Maybe they have a really good response to that. They've been working on this. They're experiencing the same problems that you and I are. Things are coming in their door the same way they're coming in mine and yours. They probably have a canned response or a thing that can help them out. Sometimes there's nothing you can do to help people, but everybody feels better when they've talked to an expert in the field. When you have to do searches, we have a hard time remembering that you can natural language search or Google search. That's not what we do. We use really intense, high-speed legal databases. We use terms and connectors. We have a whole search strategy. But when I'm dealing with sovereign citizens, when I'm dealing with people with low legal information, it's really difficult. We also have started using Google Translates to read back. We'll teach people how to copy and paste. If it seems like maybe they're having a difficult time reading or understanding what's being said to them, we'll teach them how to copy and paste parts of a website out, throw it in Google Translate. It will read it back to you. So it's a great way to deal with people who seem to have low literacy. So, it's also a great way if you're proofing a document to have it read back to you when you've missed those little and, the, whatever, those little terms. I've saved myself many a day. Google Translate, I love them. When you respond, don't put your words back into their questions. Don't second guess what they're doing. Just tell them. And then follow up and refer. There's a lot of legal services out there, your local bar associations, your clerks of court, the county law libraries. We'll send people down here to Angela. Sometimes we are appellate court experts, law and legislation experts up at the Supreme Court. We're not necessarily somebody that can tell you how you file a case in municipal court. It's not what we do. So we will send them to other people. One of our last slides is your work done for you. If you haven't, or you get forms questions, the Supreme Court has a number of standardized forms that we've put out for the courts to use. They're fantastic. They're working on updating some of them. They're also, if you use the Supreme Court's website, I will tell you they're in the process of updating it. It'll probably take them a year, but we're in the process of updating it because we can't find the forms either. 100% we can't find our forms. Sometimes we can, but they're kind of spread out all over the place. So they are working on updating our website. There's a lot of information out there from the Supreme Court. It's available to you, to the public. and we are working on making that more accessible. The clerk of courts here in Franklin County has a fantastic general forms and fees to help get people started. They do a really good job for civil cases here in Franklin County, and that's municipal and common pleas court is where pretty much everybody is starting, unless you're doing something really super specific. That's great. The resources, the Franklin County, if you've never used Angela's LibGuides, they're amazing. We refer people to them all the time because, again, it's talking about specifically here in Franklin County, how things will go wrong. I assume most of you are practicing in.
You said Angela what?
Angela has LibGuides. Have you ever looked at, so there's on Angela's website for here at the Franklin County, Angela's the director here, So here Franklin County has a number of LibGuides. So they're specific guides that kind of tell you forms that are available, all that kind of information that's available, where to link to books, articles,
LIB?
LIB,
They're topical. They're really helpful for people who are low information too, because they do like a really good, I know there's a divorce one that I send people all the time because it kind of overviews Ohio divorce law and then looks at it specifically in Franklin County too. So sometimes people who want to do their own divorces, it helps to send them this guide.
Yeah.
Then they can kind of read through and see what statutes, and they can see the forms, and they can see what resources are available here.
So, and if you're not practicing just exclusively here in Franklin County, a lot of our other law libraries around the county, Delaware has a pretty good set. And then kind of for general Ohio law, our law schools also are putting some of these out on general Ohio topics. So Moritz, University of Cincinnati, you can find these all over the place. And these librarians have really kind of condensed, if you have to send something out to people, it's a really good resource we found, and they've done a lot of work. Our other resource is the Ohio Legal Help. They're the people coming in to talk next week, or next month, so that's my plug for them. This is a fantastic, we've seen this in beta, we've seen this several times, we've been able to use it. There's kind of a general overview out. If you have people coming in with low legal information or fairly common problems, this is basically going to be, for lack of a better word, a decision tree. Says, are you a citizen of the state of Ohio? Yes. Okay, if you're a citizen of the state of Ohio, where are you? Gives you 88 counties. Yes. Is this? Yes. Is this? Yeah. So it's basically just yes and no, filling out some simple questions, filling out some forms. It will save, I think they're working on it, saving some information so you don't have to constantly re-enter information. It is going to be, if you have people coming in with basic legal problems and low legal information, hands down the best website I have ever seen. And that's saying a lot. I've been doing this for a really long time. So I am super excited. If you haven't signed up for that brown bag, you should, because it's a real exciting program. So there is that. I could keep talking about people who could help you for forever. But know that here, the Franklin County Law Library, us up at the Supreme Court, if there's a question we can help you with, you should feel free to contact us at any time. Help may be somewhere else. We do use lawyer referral services a lot. We send people links to this a lot because sometimes these people just need an attorney. And whether they're following that or not, that's not a decision that I can make for them. But we do, with our disclaimer, send out some referral services. If you've never looked at the Ohio State Bar Association, they have a lot of frequently asked common questions that kind of have an answer to. Those are really great. And there's actually a fair amount now in Ohio of specialty assistance out there. Pro seniors, for veterans, for people who are victims of domestic abuse. There are several websites and organizations devoted to helping them with their legal problems. So if you have people coming in with low legal information, misinformation that fall into one of those categories, there are a lot of resources out there to help them now. So we listed a few of them on the slides as well. So we are almost to the end of our time. This is our thank you. What questions can we answer for you? Or do you guys have any particularly fantastic, I just need to share this story and see what you think kind of moments? Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I just wanted to share one of my techniques and maybe figure out if it's even ethical. I run into our sovereign citizens at child support hearings. And first I listen, and then I say, there's nothing I can do to prevent you from filing, in your courts. But for today's purposes, this is the way it works. and you can get a continuance, an attorney, but like I almost pretend that there's this parallel universe, and
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't-
Where's the courthouse?
and sometimes they'll say, well, where is it? I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know, I know about this court.
Yeah.
So I
I don't think that's a bad plan. A lot of things are, I'm not offering you legal advice. Like that's my line, and we will, you direct people to another resource, and they're experts. Like that's kind of the same way I'm coming down. They're experts at what they do. So maybe you need to go and talk to them. I'm sorry for whoever that just created more work for in this room. Yes.
Something, you had some synonymous phrases, but something I like to say is, what's the bottom line? When things are dragging out, there's nothing special about it, you might use an A situation, but I'll say, okay, what's the bottom line today?
Yes.
Here, preferably this afternoon.
Preferably in the next 10 minutes.
Sometimes that helps hint that we need to
Yes.
get past the ideological debate and the legal debate.
Absolutely. And do you find most of the time that's
Not as often as I'd like.
fair enough? Yeah.
But sometimes it helps a lot.
Yeah.
It gives them the idea that there's someplace we can get if they just express it at the right time.
Yeah. And that's true. I mean, a lot of times it is very hard to get to the question. Yes.
If you've got some time, I could get one on a speakerphone that is chasing me around that wants me to speak to this Bobby's group about their custody and support issues. I mean, he's really interesting.
They haven't. And here's the thing. The nice thing, the Southern Poverty Law Center classifies sovereign citizens as a hate group, as definitely a threat to things. By and large, we find of the people that walk in, and whether this probably is your experience, and I'd be interested to it, they're nice, they're polite, they're courteous. I'm not afraid that I'm going to suffer any kind of injury. There are people that come in that are threatening, that walk in your doors that, maybe that's not you could see how it's nice to have security in your building. But sovereign citizens, I mean, by and large, are very lovely people.
This guy's he's concerned about the state's authority to impose an arbitrary guideline, which is actually, I really believe, is an arbitrary number that the child would not enjoy if both parents were home working.
Yeah.
But they've got a different perspective on that.
Yeah, and that's that kind of, if it's the law and you don't like it, here's the number for your state representative. Nobody works in the constituent office for any state senator representative, right? Yeah, I kind of feel for those people. Yes.
Well, this happened once where someone came in and said, you can't remove my child because Franklin County Children's Services doesn't exist, because Franklin County doesn't exist, because the state of Ohio never ratified the Constitution. There's a defect. You've heard that before.
Yes, yeah. I also get the
So we are
yeah.
lawless
Yeah, just
rule, I guess, but that's the way it spins.
yeah.
You can't do that because there's no legitimacy to any level of government in the state of Ohio.
Absolutely. And that's
But how do they get there? That's my question.
Because there was they say there was some sort of defect when Ohio ratified the Constitution. You've heard that.
yes, I've heard that, and we also get the Ohio isn't really a state because when we sent the thing in 1803, Congress didn't really sign it. They fixed that in 1957, and they made it retroactive. But Ohio isn't really a state of the union because, and in their defense, it's somewhat true, but not really.
British law still applies.
Yes.
So that's the way it spins.
It's a really, in some of these things, you can, I could go to the trouble of, I can get out, you scan, and I can show you the law in 57 that, they made it retroactive.
Yep.
But that's not what they want to hear. But no, it's.
They're saying it's stubborn.
Yeah, they're saying it's stubborn. That's exactly on the pyramid where it's difficult. I mean, every day we're dealing with it. Every day you're dealing with it. And no, you have our sympathy and our assistance if we can provide it. It is, people are walking off the street and you're dealing with the public, and every day that can be an adventure. Is there anything else anybody would like to share? Well, fantastic. Thank you guys so much for your time today. I hope we gave you some helpful hints.